You're listening to The Briefing, first broadcast on the 20th of October 2025 on Monocle Radio. Hello and welcome to The Briefing, broadcasting to you live from Studio One here at Midori House in London. I'm Tom Edwards. Coming up on today's programme, China's leadership convenes to set a course for 2030 that they hope will pave a way out of debt, property value decline and an ageing population. We'll be in Beijing for more on that. To Paris next, where our bureau chief Simon Bouvier will bring us the latest on a brazen daylight Louvre jewellery heist. Simon, what have you got for us?
Well, Tom will be unpacking bold headlines and the frantic finger-pointing that is underway among the political class to decide who is responsible for letting this happen.
More from Simon on the way in just a moment. We'll also look back on Frieze Week here in London with Monocle's culture editor and art fair attender-in-chief, Sophie Monaghan-Coombs. How was it for you, Sophie?
Well, Tom, after a busy and positive week at Frieze London, all eyes now turn to Paris. I'll be reflecting on the week at Frieze and looking ahead at what's to come at Art Basel Paris.
More from Sophie later. All that and the latest headlines on the way here on The Briefing with me, Tom Edwards. Hey, very warm welcome to this Monday edition of The Briefing. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever in the world you are. Great to have you with us here on Monocle Radio. We start in Beijing. China's Communist Party is holding a 4-day closed-door meeting there to set the next 5-year plan. But what is on the agenda and will it deliver? Well, I'm delighted to say we're joined now by Jonathan Cheng, Wall Street Journal's China bureau chief, on the line from Beijing. Good evening to you, Jonathan. In the build-up to this latest session, what's kind of dominating the discourse and the conversation where you are?
Well, obviously, 5-year plans, these are very Communist Party sort of things that they do. You don't see these so often in the West, but they do take these very seriously out here. And of course, the backdrop is U.S.-China competition. We see that in the headlines every day. And even though this is a 5-year plan, it's not looking at necessarily even the Trump administration. It's trying to look even beyond that. But nonetheless, that's obviously front and center for people here in Beijing. And it does, in fact, factor in quite closely to what they're thinking about, because they are going to be talking a lot about the economy, a lot about the structure of the economy, and a lot about supply chains and how they want the economy to look. If you look at 5 years ago, they talked a lot about economic self-sufficiency, and I think that's exactly what we're seeing playing out in the headlines right now. So I think what we're seeing in the news really just reaffirms the direction that they've been trying to set for the last 5 years. And we don't know exactly what they're going to say, but we expect that they're not going to want to deviate too far from the path they've taken, because I think they're looking at the Trump administration and how things are going with the trade war, and I think they're feeling pretty good.
Yeah, well, we'll maybe come back to the trade and tariffs in a second, but just on that point about self-sufficiency, this, as you said, has been a narrative we've heard before from policymakers. What about boosting domestic consumption, Jonathan? That's another really key part of an economy. There are deflationary pressures. We know the economy is quite indebted. I mentioned at the top, this big slump in property. What are you expecting to hear in policy terms about looking at that domestic consumption picture?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right to highlight those points. Those are all very real attributes of the Chinese economy right now. I don't think the leadership is happy with all of that. I do think, though, that they do see that as more of a short-term thing that they need to get through, whereas the long-term is dominating technology of the future, dominating supply chains of the future. They talk a lot about chokeholds here in China, and the rare earth fight that we've seen is an example of that. So I don't want to dismiss that. I just think that that's how they see things here in Beijing. They may very well be wrong, and the problems that are building up in the economy in the short term may become so acute that they're forced to have to deal with this rather than keeping their eyes on the horizon. But again, this 5-year plan the whole point is to try to keep their eyes on the horizon.
Yeah, and I guess if we look at the longer term planning then and that horizon that's in view, what about a reform agenda? Some fiscal reforms needed, appetite, to a degree in certain quarters, if we look at, local government debt, for example. But it's interesting from what you say, I sense that it's more about continuity, right? And sort of evolution of these policies rather than any swinging changes. Is that a fair characterization, Jonathan?
Yes, I think that's probably fair, but ultimately we don't know until we see the document, and it won't be until Thursday probably that we'll have a glimpse of what they've talked about. It won't all be fleshed out in full until March next year, but by Thursday we should have a pretty good idea of the direction that they're heading in. And I think if you talk to most experts, whether they be economists or whether they're analysts who are looking more geopolitically and politically at China, I think the consensus does seem to be that continuity will likely be the order of the day. But you're absolutely right. They do have a lot of problems that are building up. They don't have a real remedy for the property sector when it comes to consumption. It is too low in the mix, at least if you listen to the World Bank, the IMF, and these sorts of institutions. It's unclear whether Xi Jinping shares that view, but certainly that is a very widespread view. And in general, there are just a lot of problems that they themselves have acknowledged when it comes to retirement age, when it comes to demographics, when it comes to taxes, property taxes, these very deep structural things that are not necessarily the most front of mind. These are problems that you can sort of kick the can down the road a little bit on, and they have done that for many years, but perhaps this is the time that they confront these and deal with them. We don't know.
Yeah, there's always the what are those? They're the known unknowns, I guess, Jonathan, right? Talk to me about President Xi. You mentioned him there. And look, there's always a lot of interest and sometimes wild speculation about the conduct at these various different meetings, whether it's sort of Politburo meetings and the rest, about the personality politics, who does what, who sits where, and all the rest of this. This kind of thing is behind closed doors largely. Do we ever expect to learn anything more about Xi's personal ambitions or how he's looking to keep moving his personal agenda forwards, or is that kind of not one that we should be thinking about at this session?
It's one that is always there. I mean, this is a man who has concentrated power to a degree that hasn't been seen in decades, so it really does matter. The problem, of course, is the opacity of the system does not really allow us to do much other than to read the tea leaves, to talk to people who may or may not be in the know, and you see a lot of rumors flying left and right on the internet and in the Chinese diaspora and elsewhere. But ultimately, I think what we might see this time around is on Friday, in other words, just 3 or 4 days ago, we had the Communist Party strip 9 senior military officials of their party membership. They're going to go under court-martial. These are the latest victims in a very long-running military purge that's been happening in China. It's possible that the timing of that on Friday, coming right before the opening of this plenum, then allows for the appointment of new people to fill those roles. Again, that remains to be seen. But that's to answer your question there about the personnel and the people around Xi Jinping and the upper echelons of the Chinese party state. And I think that will definitely be something that people are watching closely for, but I don't think we know just yet what that may be.
It is somewhat opaque, Jonathan. That's why we like having your perspicacity, because it helps us to understand better. Trade and tariffs, I mentioned we come back to this. Let's just finish by talking about that once again. Renewed Sino-US tensions, of course, around trade. Lots of conversation about what that might look like. What's the rest of the world's picture? This broader pushback, against cheap Chinese exports, for example. What might we learn in the coming days, do you think, about what the next kind of little phase might look like, Jonathan, in your view?
Well, in addition to this party meeting that we have in Beijing, we do also have the Treasury Secretary of the United States, Scott Bessent, flying to Malaysia. I believe it will be later this week to talk to his Chinese counterpart, He Lifeng, to discuss exactly this issue. Of course, this comes to the trade war, it comes to rare earths, and it comes to these sort of supply chain issues that have really been the battleground for this particular round of the trade war. I think, again, it plugs in very closely to all of these larger picture things that China is thinking about. It spent a lot of time planning and getting this advantage in rare earths, and now you can see that they have no hesitation in deploying it. And I think they've really shown, not just the US, but the entire Western world, just how dominant they are in this perhaps arcane, but actually quite central and quite foundational sort of a level in the modern economy.
Yeah, fascinating. Jonathan, look, brilliant stuff. Thanks very much for making sense of that for us. That was our friend Jonathan Cheng, Wall Street Journal's China Bureau Chief. On the line from Beijing, plenty happening around the globe today. Let's cross over and hear from Monocle's Carlotta Rebello, who's standing by with the day's other news headlines.
Thanks, Tom. US President Donald Trump says the ceasefire in Gaza is still in place, hours after Israel carried out a series of airstrikes. Israel and Hamas have accused each other of breaching the deal. Meanwhile, US advisor Jared Kushner and Special Envoy Steve Witkoff have arrived in Israel to meet with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on Tuesday. Germany plans to order an additional 15 F-35 fighter jets from Lockheed Martin in a deal expected to cost €2.5 billion. Berlin has previously denied plans to acquire additional aircraft, but an expanded defense budget has since created more scope for weapons purchases. The F-35 aircraft are designed to succeed the Tornadoes in their role of carrying US nuclear bombs stored in Germany in the event of a conflict. And L'Oreal will acquire Kering's beauty portfolio for $4.6 billion. Under the agreement, L'Oreal will also have exclusive rights to make beauty products for both houses and for fashion houses such as Gucci. The companies will also launch what they have described as a 50-50 joint venture to explore business opportunities in beauty and wellness. Those are today's headlines. Back to you, Tom.
Thank you very much indeed, Carlotta. We will have the latest news headlines for you at the top of the next hour, just after 1300 here in London. 11 minutes past midday here at the present on the briefing, and you cannot have missed news of yesterday's quite brazen raid on the Louvre in Paris. Let's get the latest from the French capital. Our Simon Bouvier, Monocle's Paris Bureau Chief, is standing by. Good afternoon to you, Simon. Pretty extraordinary, and you sort of whetted our appetites at the top. Finger pointing, acclaim in some quarters of the media for these daring villains who've made off with all of these priceless pieces. What's everyone talking about where you are?
I mean, I think it's a confluence, Tom, of headlines that, we're always going to be halfway between, sensational and even admiring of the thieves who conducted this, as you said, very brazen robbery of the Galerie d'Apollon, which is on the first floor of the Louvre on the side of the river, on the banks. They just, as many people are now aware, since this story has been making the rounds of all of the news channels all around the world, they just used electrical lift that Parisians are so familiar with because they're used all the time to, lift furnitures into apartments or clean windows and so on and so forth to hoist themselves up, just two of them. And then using grinders, they busted open the windows in broad daylight. As you said, there were visitors and security guards in there. The guards were unarmed. They just threatened them with their power tools, broke two cases, stole the jewels inside, and made off with them. They haven't been found since, but obviously most of the resources of not just the city of Paris, but the French state are now being deployed to try to find them. But in the meantime, everybody's making comparisons to Arsène Lupin, the literary character, also because of the kind of Netflix TV show that was inspired by it and that features in the TV show, I think actually the inaugural episode, if I'm not mistaken, a scene where jewels are stolen from the Louvre, in even more spectacular fashion. I think it involves crashing a car through the pyramid. But in any case, there is this note, Tom, of admiration for the thieves. And meanwhile, in the political class, everybody is blaming one another for letting this happen.
Well, this is it, and it's funny because immediately when I just first heard the breaking news, I thought of Monsieur Lupin and of course the later the Netflix version. these guys lacked some of the subtlety, some of the subterfuge. As you say, angled grinders, chainsaws, call it what you want. They basically, it was a glorified smash and grab. And then, they dropped some of their loot as they scarpered. What's interesting, though, is the response, I guess, from the authorities and from civic society. Your president, Simon, has said it's an attack on our shared heritage that we cherish. It's because it's our shared history. People will say, look, we've had a number of fairly high-profile heists in Paris, other museums across France. How is it possible in broad daylight during museum opening hours for somebody? It's not a convoluted crime, is it? A cherry picker and a bunch of sledgehammers, and then to get away. Do you think there's going to be heads are going to roll? How is that pressure going to manifest itself, do you think, Simon?
Well, I think the heads rolling part will depend on what happens with the investigation and if these thieves are caught in the coming days. But I do think that there are a number of articles, including a very interesting report in Le Figaro that got a sneak peek into a report, official government report, into the delays that have kind of impeded the Louvre specifically from implementing recommended security fixes. But Tom, you got to think this is a place that is designed to welcome the public. It is absolutely gigantic, over 70,000 square meters of galleries with 35,000 plus works that are exhibited, plus many, many more in the archives. I think the balance between making this a place that is reasonably safe from people just say unhanging paintings from where they're positioned on the wall, which was the case in the earlier 20th century. There was most notably the high-profile theft of the Mona Lisa, which disappeared for a couple of years, and then it turned out that somebody who had worked on the windows at the museum and who fancied it kind of decided to unhang it and bring it to his hometown in Italy, and it was found, the legend says, under his bed after a couple of years. I think those days are long gone, but the combination of the media hype and the current political climate, as you know, we're in a national political crisis here. The mayoral elections in Paris are next year, so there's a lot of jockeying for position in that area as well. I'm worried that both of these things will combine to lead the authorities to want to seem tough and announce all of these measures that might rob us of something even more important than these jewels, which is this space that welcomes the world, making the atmosphere there oppressive, making it feel like you're walking into an embassy or something, or a police station, even worse. It will just take away something intangible and very valuable, which is this museum that welcomes the entire world and makes us amazed in the face of what we're capable of achieving.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a balancing act we must strike with some dexterity. Simon, common sense, great common sense and smart insights as always. That's our Simon Bouvier, Monocle's Paris Bureau Chief, joining us here on The Briefing on Monocle Radio. You are listening to The Briefing, 18 minutes past midday. Now, Frieze has wrapped up just across the Euston Road here in London, but the main fair and its Masters offshoot are but two of plentiful art happenings across the city this past week. A dynamic few days, but did it deliver? Well, Sophie Monaghan-Coombs is Monocle's Associate Editor for Culture, and she's here to tell us what caught her eye and what we can make of the market. Hi, Sophie.
Hi, Tom. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. Now, before that, you were listening in there just to Simon talking about this extraordinary heist. Timely, because this has been something that you've been musing about in the pages of Monocle magazine. And because one of the questions I didn't have time to ask Simon was, what happens to all these priceless treasures? One presumes they can't turn up on the common market. So you fear gems will be broken off pieces and distributed, gold will be melted down and resold. I don't know, what explains our ongoing fascination and love affair with these heists, and how have you been training your monocle lens on it in the pages of the magazine?
Well, I have to say the Louvre heist comes at quite a good time for me, actually.
You weren't involved, Sophie, were you?
But I can promote a piece that I have coming out this Thursday in Monocle magazine. So for this piece, the starting point was a recent news story. I'm sure lots of people remember. This Dutch journalist in the summer found an artwork that was looted during the Nazi regime, and it turned up in South America. So I spoke to the journalist who did the detective work there and tracked it down. And then I also went and spoke to a couple of organisations who work in finding stolen artworks. And as you say, jewellery is quite different because it's very surprising to be able to steal an artwork and to find someone to sell it to who is happy to keep it hidden and to not make a big deal out of it. But the issue with jewellery is that, as you say, you break it apart, you melt it down, you ruin what it was, and also it is a way of distributing it, getting it out there in the market, and hiding your involvement. So this is a really interesting. It's interesting that this has happened now. In the piece that I wrote, I also did a little timeline of heists, and of course the Mona Lisa going missing at the beginning of the 20th century is in there, and of course that is one of the main reasons why the Mona Lisa is so famous now, because it went missing. No one cared about it that much before that happened.
She wasn't a big deal in 1911, yeah. so they say. It's a brilliant piece. Look out for that. That is in the November issue. Is that right, Sophie? Which is out on Thursday. Maybe you'll be able to read more about that across Monocle's digital channels in the days ahead. But Sophie, I did want to ask you about Frieze. How was it for you? We said at the top, the market seemed quite buoyant. People were quite optimistic, which surprised me a little bit, given some concerns about spend and about the robustness of the market in broad terms. What did you, I don't know, how did the week go? What did you make of it?
Yeah, I think, given all of the talk about both the market beforehand, but also kind of pitching Art Basel Paris as this big competitor, there was a lot of chat that, some American collectors maybe were going to skip Frieze altogether, just head to Paris this week. So I was sort of expecting the atmosphere to be a little bit subdued, but I actually found it super, super busy, very buzzy. And in terms of sales, I talked to quite a few galleries on the fair floor, and they were really optimistic. Lots of people had really strong sales in the early days. I think there were less kind of pre-sales beforehand, but then once people arrived, it did seem like everyone was doing very well. The kind of market felt quite buoyant. So I think overall it was a really positive atmosphere in general.
And in terms of, I don't know, works that jumped out, other venues, because I think, again, I said this earlier, of course, the focus is very much on what's happening in the Regent's Park, but there's stuff happening everywhere. Not just shows, new openings, new spaces. London showed, I don't know, a really good, it's sort of its art face to the world, I thought, last week. Do you go along with that?
Yeah, I completely agree. As well as the amazing museum shows put on by, some of the big sort of institutions here, there was lots and lots of new things happening, kind of new spaces opening up. I went to a couple of other art fairs. So I went to Minor Attractions, which takes over the Mandrake Hotel, and you walk into hotel rooms and hotel bathrooms, and they have little exhibitions from galleries kind of all over the world, and I thought that was great. I went to Echo Soho, which is a brand new fair which spotlights galleries led by women, and that was really wonderful. It was very kind of small and boutique, but I thought it was very well done. And then lots of new spaces. Sadie Coles has a new gallery space, same as Maureen Paley, and a few other sort of big, well-known gallerists as well. But the one that I really want to spotlight, which that was breathtaking, and which is open now, so people can go, indefinitely in the future, is Ibraz, which is just off Regent Street. It's the new headquarters for this Middle Eastern and North African arts organisation, and it's just in the most wonderful building. And they've got a lovely cafe, they've got a bookshop, and then they've got exhibition spaces, a little library, performance spaces. It's really worth checking out, and it's super central, and it's just this sort of oasis of calm. And I thought it was great.
And that's great because, of course, as you say, visitors to London or Londoners can head there indefinitely. So it's, the show may have rolled out of town, but you can still enjoy these delights. It's funny, I made a quick flying visit to Frieze and Frieze Masters last week. as ever, I kind of found Masters a bit more palatable and manageable. I do get a bit overwhelmed in Frieze proper, and I don't know whether it's because of the overwhelming medley of images and colours and action and light. I always get drawn to the same works, usually monochrome, often a bit more simple, adding a change of pace. And one thing that I really loved, there was lots of pieces by Sei Oksu, the Korean sort of ink painting master, and there's a really beautiful special kind of piece that was set up in partnership with LG. They've got these amazing kind of transparent TVs, and his sons have sort of reimagined his work using video and multimedia. And it was this really beautiful meeting of, the old traditional sort of heritage pieces of work with the modern, and this is all part of LG Signature's kind of engagement with the arts internationally. And I thought it was a super successful iteration. And actually, I went and just got a moment of calm there, Sophie. I just sat and stood for about 5 minutes.
You did a very good job finding it.
Well, I managed to chuck it down. But I don't know, do you suffer a little bit from that? Just how overwhelming it all is? Or I don't know, because you've got your professional glasses on, are you able to kind of take it all in your stride?
I think I do find Frieze London a little bit overwhelming. and do you know what? I think it's a good idea to kind of look up what you might want to see first. So I had recently interviewed the painter Rose Wiley, and I knew that she had one of her works on at David's Werner, so I headed there immediately, and I kind of took that approach. But I do think Frieze Masters is just a little bit calmer. There's a little bit of a less frenzied atmosphere. So when I was there, I checked in my bag and my phone, and I just wandered, and I saw some really lovely things.
Beautiful. I think it's the low lighting. It's a bit like Studio One, isn't it? Really, really quickly, Sophie, because I'm getting ordered to wrap things up. Art Basel Paris then. So maybe it's not going to steal the crown completely of Frieze. What is it going to do? Are you excited? What are you expecting?
Yeah, I'm really excited. Art Basel Paris is an amazing fair. It returned to it went to the Grand Palais last year for the first year. That was its sort of destination, but they couldn't put it on there until the Olympics had wrapped up. It's a lovely, lovely venue, and I think it makes the whole atmosphere quite calming, because if you get a little bit overwhelmed, all the contemporary art, you can just look up. Those vaulted ceilings are beautiful. So there's obviously lots and lots happening. There is both the Art Basel Fair, and then there's also lots of satellite fairs. I'll definitely go to Paris International. I always head there during Art Basel Paris. And then, of course, there are lots of exhibition shows as well. So at the d'Orsay, there's a big John Singer Sargent show that I'm really excited to see. And then Gerhard Richter at the Louis Vuitton Fondation, which I think will be great as well.
Brilliant. And please don't take your cherry picker, as I know you do, because it will raise suspicions in these current times. Sophie Monaghan-Coombs, Monocle's Associate Editor for Culture, thank you very much for joining us here on a jam-packed Monday briefing. And that, as you may have imagined, listeners, is all we have time for on today's programme, which was expertly produced by Monica Lillis and Ryuma Takahashi. Our researcher was Joanna Moser. Our studio manager was Christy O'Grady. My thanks to them, one and all. We'll be back tomorrow, Tuesday, at the very same time, noon in London, 1300 if you're listening in Paris. If you're listening in Paris and you've stolen those works, give them back. They belong to the nation. I'm Tom Edwards. Goodbye and thanks for listening.